Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ Hero. Welcome to the program. On tonight's headlines.
8 people, the majority of them Asian women, are killed in shootings at 3 different spas in the U.S. state of Georgia, with a 21-year-old white man in custody on suspicion of staging all 3 attacks.
Plumes of smoke rise above streets in Myanmar's biggest city following intense clashes between anti-coup protesters and security forces.
The WHO's expert vaccine advisor said they could recommend Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 jab for use in countries where coronavirus variants of concern are circulating.
And earlier, we were able to talk to Mr. Robespierre Bolivar, Deputy Chief of Mission at the Philippine Embassy in Tokyo, to give us an update on the coronavirus situation there.
Six Asian women were among 8 people shot and killed at spas around the U.S. city of Atlanta on Tuesday, with the white man in custody on suspicion of staging all 3 attacks. Take a look. The shootings came with many Asian Americans already on edge following a recent spike in hate crimes against the community, and triggered immediate fears that Asian-run businesses may have been deliberately targeted. 4 of the victims were killed at Young's Asian Massage near Ackworth, a suburb of Georgia state capital Atlanta. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported Captain Jay Baker of the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office told the paper the victims were 2 Asian women, a white woman, and a white man, while a Hispanic man was wounded. Police told the Atlanta Journal that all 4 were Asian women, and South Korea's Yonhap news agency reported the country's foreign ministry had confirmed that 4 of the victims were of Korean descent. Authorities have identified Robert Aaron Long as a suspect in all 3 shootings. Take a look.
They're really nice girls. They just do great massages. They do great massages over here, so it's just unfortunate.
Extreme priority. Extreme priority. That's I'm here. You got a lot of the command staff, Zone 2 commander, so it is extreme priority for us.
The suspect was identified as Robert Aaron Long, 21 years old, he lives in unincorporated Cherokee County, but he is currently in custody in Crisp County. We've been communicating with them. My understanding they did a pit maneuver on him and took him into custody, as far as I know, without incident. So the suspect, who we believe committed these crimes here today in Cherokee County, is in custody in Crisp County.
And how are they? How is his wife feeling?
She's completely devastated. She's telling all the family to pray for him, because we know he will be okay, but we just... They had shot 3 ladies at in front of the massage, well, not in front of the massage, but at the massage building, and that he had gotten also shot, but he hadn't passed away or anything. He got sent. He's in the hospital. I was just thinking how we never know when we're at the wrong place at the wrong time, because this was so all of a sudden, and it was just like a lot of things racing through my head.
News of the shooting came just hours after the release of a report by the advocacy group Stop AAPI Hate suggested a marked increase in hate crimes against Asian Americans, with women disproportionately affected. In a tally of incidents reported to the group between March 2020 and February this year, almost 70% of Asian American survey respondents said they had faced verbal harassment, and just over 1 in 10 said they had experienced physical assault. Georgia is home to nearly 500,000 Asian residents, or just over 4% of its population, according to the Asian American Advocacy Fund. In an address to the nation last Thursday, President Joe Biden forcefully condemned what he called vicious hate crimes against Asian Americans who have been attacked, harassed, blamed, and scapegoated. He said it's wrong, it's un-American, and it must stop.
In other news, plumes of smoke rose Wednesday above a part of Myanmar's biggest city under martial law, which has turned into a battle zone with burning barricades and security forces firing at unarmed anti-coup protesters. Traumatized residents have fled the industrial neighborhood in Yangon that has become one of the flashpoint sites in a nationwide uprising against the military's coup nearly 7 weeks ago. The junta has increasingly deployed heavier force to quell the demonstrations, with more than 200 protesters reported to have been killed in the crackdown. The junta on Sunday imposed martial law on Lang Tar Yar and later on other protest hotspot townships, effectively placing nearly 2 million people under complete control of military commanders. Residents, many of them migrant workers, have since fled back to their home states, piling their belongings and families onto flatbed trucks and the backs of motorbikes.
Alarmed at the strength of the opposition to the coup, the Myanmar junta is trying to instill fear with increasing violence, according to Kin Zhao Win, the director of the Tampadipa Institute, a Yangon-based think tank. And he said he doesn't think a peaceful and non-violent resolution will be he doesn't think this will happen. Take a look.
What is most likely to happen is that it's going to end in perhaps a big bang, and a high number of casualties, and a lot of people taking up arms, perhaps what they did in 1988, go into the jungle and enlist with the ethnic armed organizations, and the civil war goes on. So I don't see any way where we can get to a peaceful, non-violent resolution. In a way, it's a leaderless revolution. So who's going to negotiate with the military? No one's come up. We know that the revolution, the movement, can go on its own momentum. But when you think about negotiations, it's almost impossible. And the military does not have any tendency or inclination or desire to negotiate. For them is going all out. In this way, it's more frightening than 1988.
Meanwhile, China says it has lodged solemn representations with the United States and Japan over the joint statement from top-level diplomatic and defense officials of both countries. Earlier, U.S. and Japanese foreign and defense ministers warned Tuesday against coercion and destabilizing behavior by China after top-level talks in Tokyo. Watch this.
We're united in the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region, where countries follow the rules, cooperate whenever they can, and resolve their differences peacefully. And in particular, we will push back if necessary when China uses coercion or aggression to get its way.
In terms of the specific timeline of China, I won't get involved in any kind of hypotheticals or speculate on what that may be. I think you know that as Secretary of Defense, my job is to make sure that we are as ready, as fast as we could possibly be to meet any challenge that would face us or the alliance.
尖閣諸島周辺における中国海警船の活動は明確な国際法違反です。2+2では中国による海警法に関する深刻な懸念で一致をし、私から日本の領土をあらゆる手段で守る決意を表明しました。米国からはこれに対し尖閣諸島に対する日米安保条約第5条の適用を含む我が国防衛へのコミットメントの再確認がありました。
美日联合声明恶意攻击中方对外政策，严重干涉中国内政，妄图损害中方利益。中方对此强烈不满，坚决反对。我们已经分别向美日双方提出严正交涉。我们强烈敦促美日立即停止干涉中国内政， 立即停止针对中国的小圈子，立即停止破坏地区和平稳定的大局。中方将采取一切必要措施，坚决捍卫自身主权、安全和发展利益。我想强调，举行中美高层战略对话系美方提议，2+2的形式也是美方提议的。我们希望通过此次对话，双方能够按照两国元首通话精神，聚焦合作，管控分歧，推动中美关系重回正轨。
Beijing's response comes just a day before China's top diplomats are set to meet top U.S. officials in Alaska in their first face-to-face talk since President Joe Biden's administration came to power. But temperatures are rising ahead of the Alaska meet, which will pit U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan against senior Chinese official Yang Jiechi and Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
In other news, more than 400 people have been so far convicted in a sweeping crackdown in Belarus following mass protests against President Alexander Lukashenko's regime last year, according to prosecutors. The ex-Soviet country was gripped by months of demonstrations after Lukashenko claimed re-election in an August vote that the opposition and Western diplomats said was rigged. Take a look. As the demonstrations subsided, activists, protesters, and journalists were prosecuted, and the court system has since become a conveyor belt of guilty verdicts. To date, prosecutors have sent 468 criminal cases to courts against 631 people in connection with participation in illegal mass events and protests that grossly violate public order, the Prosecutor General's office said in a statement. The suspects had publicly insulted, threatened, and used violence against law enforcement officials and damaged private property, according to the statement. Prosecutors listed examples of people they had pursued, including a 35-year-old man who had posted insulting comments against law enforcement on the Odnoklassniki social network. The highest sentence handed out was 10 years. Last month, 16-year-old Mikizita Salataru, who suffers from epilepsy, was sentenced to 5 years in juvenile prison for participating in mass riots. Lukashenko, who has ruled Belarus with an iron fist since 1994, has said that he withstood a color revolution directed by the West, a reference to revolts that broke out in the early 2000s, often in post-Soviet countries.
Meanwhile, the EU will unveil a proposed European vaccine pass to ease travel, an idea pushed by tourist hotspots such as Greece that are desperate to save their crippled economies. The proposal by the European Commission, the EU's executive arm, would create a digital certificate to show at airports and border crossings to prove that the traveler has received the precious jab. The idea is to allow inoculated tourists to get around restrictions on non-essential travel that have spread across Europe as a second and third wave of COVID-19 infections brought much intra-EU travel to a standstill. EU Commission spokesman Eric Mamer said Tuesday, and quote, "We don't call it a vaccine passport, we call it a digital or green digital certificate." The plan, however, will face stiff resistance from many member states, a key concern being that those still awaiting vaccinations would be discriminated against.
Australia asked AstraZeneca and the European Union for urgent access to 1 million vaccines to deal with an alarming COVID-19 surge in neighboring Papua New Guinea. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said he wanted to divert doses that Australia had already ordered and paid for as soon as possible to address the coronavirus explosion beyond Australia's porous northern border. Take a look.
Government will also be moving immediately to gift 8,000 doses of our COVID-19 vaccine stocks from our domestic stocks, support the vaccination of frontline health workers in PNG from next week. With the support of the PNG government, we are also making a formal request to AstraZeneca and the European authorities to access 1 million doses of our contracted supplies of AstraZeneca, not for Australia, but for PNG, a developing country in desperate need of these vaccines. We've contracted them, we've paid for them, and we want to see those vaccines come here so we can support our nearest neighbour PNG deal with their urgent needs in our region. And we'll be seeking the support of the European Union and AstraZeneca to achieve that as soon as possible.
Officially, Papua New Guinea has recorded more than 1,000 new cases since March 1, nearly doubling its total since the start of the pandemic a year ago. But low rates of testing have raised concerns that the virus is rapidly spreading undetected through the population, and officials have warned the impoverished Pacific nation's fragile healthcare system is struggling to cope.
Sweden halted the use of AstraZeneca vaccine, the latest European nation to do so, as regulators investigate alleged blood clot risk. But in Amsterdam, the head of the Emergency Medicines Agency said there is no evidence of such direct link. Watch this.
So while the investigation is ongoing, we are still firmly convinced that the benefits of the AstraZeneca vaccine in preventing COVID-19 with its associated risk of hospitalization and death outweigh the risk of these side effects. So I want to also stress that at present there is no indication that vaccination has caused these conditions. They have not come up in the clinical trials and they're not listed as known or expected side events with this vaccine. I want to stress that our experts are working tirelessly to carry out this assessment as quickly as possible, but it needs a scientific evaluation. We need to have the facts first. We cannot come to a conclusion until we've done a thorough scientific analysis.
AstraZeneca and the World Health Organization say a few dozen cases of blood clot have been reported in the European Union and Britain. That's out of 17 million vaccinations.
And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by Canriv Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel, hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation, and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back to the news. A gunman in Niger have killed 58 civilians returning from a market in what authorities call barbarous attacks on a bus and nearby villages close to the country's border with Mali. The assault happened yesterday in the western Tilaberi region, where 100 people were killed in a series of attacks in January. There was no immediate claim of responsibility, but extremists linked to the Islamic State or ISIS are active in that area. Niger is part of a France-backed alliance of countries in the Sahel region battling militants, including some in a group aligned with the Islamic State known as ISWAP, an offshoot of Boko Haram. Hundreds of lives have been lost. Nearly 500,000 people have fled their homes and devastating damage has been inflicted. Archaeologists in Israel have discovered dozens of Dead Sea Scroll fragments that contain biblical texts. Authorities say they contain biblical texts that date to the 1st century. The fragments displayed yesterday were found in a desert cave south of Jerusalem. It's believed they were likely hidden during a Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire. Watch this.
מדהימה. סוף או התחלה? זו הטובה. וואו, חיים, 3 שורות. מדהימה.
What we found is new fragments of a scroll that we have known before that had been discovered in the 1950s and early 1960s. But what we found is new parts of the puzzle of this rather large manuscript. The manuscript is of a translation into Greek of the 12 minor prophets from the Bible. For the first time, we have fragments that arrive from a controlled excavation that arrive at our lab and are documented from the very first moment of discovery. So we have a very full documentation about the physical condition of the fragments and of what was done to treat them.
And it's kind of huge. It contains about between 90 to 100 liters, and it's all intact. This is, as far as we know, the most biggest intact basket, the oldest intact basket that we know of.
Wow, Chaim, 3 שורות.
The Judea Desert excavation also unearthed a cache of rare coins, a 6 millennia old skeleton of a child, and a basket described by the IAA as likely the oldest in the world, which has been carbon dated to 10,500 years old.
Actually, I was discovering those.
Continuing with the news, the WHO's expert vaccine advisor said Wednesday they could recommend Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 jab for use in countries where coronavirus variants are of concern are circulating. The vaccine has proven effective in the countries where there is a high spread of the variants, according to Alejandro Cravioto, the chair of the World Health Organization's Strategic Advisory Group of Experts on Immunization. He said after reviewing the evidence, we have a vaccine that shows to be safe and it shows to have the necessary efficacy to be recommended for use by U.S. in people over age of 18 without an upper age limit. The WHO gave its seal of approval to the single-shot J&J vaccine on Friday. It joins the 2-dose Pfizer-BioNTech jab and the AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccines made in India and in South Korea as having been signed off by the WHO. The jab won approval from the European Union on Thursday. It has also received the green light from regulators in the United States, Canada, and South Africa. In other news, U.S. President Joe Biden urged migrants not to come to the United States on Tuesday as criticism mounted over a surge in people arriving at the southern border with Mexico, including thousands of unaccompanied children. Speaking hours after his head of Homeland Security defended the administration's immigration policies, Biden also shrugged off claims that his dismantling of former President Donald Trump's tough stance had encouraged the surge, pointing out that there had been similar surges in 2019 and 2020. Watch this.
A lot of the migrants coming in saying they're coming in because you promised to make things better. It seems to be getting worse by the day. Was it a mistake not to anticipate this surge?
Well, first of all, there was a surge the last 2 years in 19 and 20. There was a surge as well.
This one might be worse.
No, well, it could be, but here's the deal. We're sending back people to, first of all, the idea that Joe Biden said come, because I heard the other day that they're coming because they know I'm a nice guy and I won't do what Trump did.
They're saying this.
Yeah. Well, here's the deal. They're not.
Do you have to say quite clearly, don't come?
Yes, I can say quite clearly, don't come. And we're in the process of getting set up. Don't leave your town or city or community.
On January 20, his first day in office, Biden scrapped several of Donald Trump's contentious immigration policies, including halting new construction of a border wall and proposing legislation to create a citizenship pathway for the nearly 11 million people living illegally in the U.S. Republican critics say Biden's policies caused a sharp increase in migrants seeking to cross into the U.S. illegally. The president spoke a day after top Republican Congressman Kevin McCarthy visited the border in Texas with fellow Republican lawmakers and accused Biden of creating a crisis. Watch this.
The security of our nation and our border is first and foremost the responsibility of our president. I came down here because I heard of the crisis. It's more than a crisis. This is a human heartbreak. The sad part about all of this, it didn't have to happen. This crisis is created by the presidential policies of this new administration. There's no other way to claim it than a Biden border crisis. I know the president's going to travel this week. This is where he should bring Air Force One. This is where he should look the people in the eye. This is where he should talk to the border agents and let them know that this is beyond a crisis. He can continue to deny it, but the only way to solve it is to first admit what he has done. And if he will not reverse action, it's going to take congressional action to do it. And that's why we're here.
We need to wake up. We need to understand. Listen, Mr. President Biden, you're an okay guy. Why don't you just admit you made a mistake with this policy and go back to the way it was and keep America safe for all of us and use that money that we're wasting down here on our American citizens. The door should not be open, and we should have immigration the right way.
The Biden administration over the weekend ordered the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, to support an effort to temporarily house thousands of children who cross the U.S.-Mexico border alone. While detained, migrant adults and families continue to be sent back to Mexico. Unaccompanied children are being processed and get help resettling with U.S. relatives. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said Saturday that numbers of unaccompanied child migrants had reached record levels, but dated the surge back to April 2020 and blamed ongoing violence, natural disasters, food insecurity, and poverty in parts of Central America. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is currently holding about 8,800 migrant children.
Back to the pandemic situation. Earlier, we were able to talk to Mr. Robespierre Bolivar, the Deputy Chief of Mission at the Philippine Embassy in Tokyo, and he gave us an update on the coronavirus situation there. Take a look.
In Tokyo in particular, and three of the surrounding prefectures, Saitama, Chiba, and Kanagawa, we are still under a state of emergency. It was extended up to Sunday. It used to be 10 prefectures, but the 7 other prefectures were taken out of the state of emergency list because the COVID-19 cases dropped significantly. Tokyo's COVID-19 cases on a daily basis has dropped considerably from where it was in December and January. But our authorities here in local government just wanted to make sure that we cover all the bases, especially since there is the new strains of the virus, which are making its way through several countries. And we've had a couple of them here in Japan already. So just to make sure that all bases are covered, and the government has extended the state of emergency in Tokyo, which has 14 million people, the biggest metropolitan area of Japan, until Sunday. And we'll see where the government goes from there.
Sir, Japan's, as you mentioned, Japan's government will likely decide, so it's been extended, the state of emergency currently in place for Tokyo and 3 nearby prefectures. In the U.S., sir, certain states can arbitrarily lift lockdown measures. Can you tell me, sir, how do local government units there work with the central government in stemming the coronavirus? And can they decide independently in situations like this?
In terms of the system of the Japanese government, they have what they call a basic law, which dictates what the federal government and the prefectural governments, and even the city governments for cities like Tokyo, which are really very massive in terms of population, it dictates how they can cooperate, what they can do, what each local or federal government is authorized to do. But for the most part, the authority for the declaration of the state of emergency emanates from the national government. The prefectural governments or the city governments can request the federal government to declare a state of emergency in their locality, but it would be up to the federal government to do so, because declaring the state of emergency will make available funds and resources from the federal national government to the prefectural government. So that is the crucial thing that we have to look out for here. And of course, they have to take into account the picture, the entire picture in the country. Of course, the local government can only see their portion of the whole picture. So it has to be leveled up to the national government so that they can decide on measures as a whole and not just piecemeal.
Health authorities have also found cases of new variants there, and there's a report that it has quadrupled over the past month. Also in Japan, they've identified the entry of new variants. Has this resulted in Japan tightening its borders, border controls? And is there a quota on entrants or visitors coming in Japan?
For now, we're waiting for an official announcement from the federal government about any restrictions that they will impose due to the new variants of the coronavirus. There are already travel restrictions in place. For instance, for the Philippines, tourists cannot visit Japan as of the moment. And the Japanese embassy and consulates general in the Philippines do not issue tourist visas. If you are, say, a permanent resident or a worker, then there are different parameters for your entry to Japan. But tourists are not allowed yet. For other countries, they face similar restrictions depending on the level of daily cases that they register, especially within environments.
How is our Filipino community there, sir?
The Philippine community is actually doing fairly well. But fortunately, we don't really have a lot of cases registered with the Filipino community. Of course, given the strict privacy laws of Japan, we can't really go into detail about the kababayans who were infected or who were hospitalized. But suffice it to say that there aren't a lot of Filipinos compared to other nationalities who have been infected by the coronavirus here in Japan.
You mentioned hospitals. Usually the hospital capacity is a factor in implementing renewed or stricter lockdowns. How's the hospital situation in Tokyo right now, sir?
The minister in charge of COVID-19 for Japan has stated that the hospital capacity is improving because of the state of emergencies as well that they declared a month ago. But they're still very wary about easing restrictions further. They have developed certain metrics for them to determine when they can ease restrictions. They're very careful about this. As we have seen in various countries, lockdowns can pull down the daily cases of COVID, but once you ease the lockdowns, the COVID cases just spike back up. So Japan is very conservative when it comes to deciding on whether to ease restrictions based on the COVID daily cases as well as the hospital capacity.
How would you compare the lockdown measures implemented there and here? Here, it's been noted by many journalists that lockdown measures in Japan are vastly different from, let's say, a country like us, the Philippines. Like say here we wear face masks with face shields, and then tracing apps. We have curfews. Cinemas remain closed. Can you briefly describe to us how the Japanese are coping with this situation?
Well, I'm sure you have encountered this, but even pre-COVID, the Japanese are comfortable already with wearing masks and hand sanitizing, especially during flu season, which is around this time of the year, January to February. So imposing wearing a face mask, especially in public, was never an issue here in Japan, and people just complied, as is their normal practice. Also sanitizing and the other parameters that were put in place for the COVID-19 pandemic were actually based on many of the traditions which the Japanese have already adopted as part of their daily life. So it wasn't as drastic, shall we say, as in some other countries where you can hear protests about this or that restriction. Of course, the Japanese government still had a lot of adjustments made because, as you can remember, Japan was one of the first countries which was hit by the COVID pandemic way back, more than a year ago, in fact. And they had a lot of adjustments that they had to make in terms of the restrictions, the parameters governing people's excursions out of their homes. We still have some restrictions in place. Certain restaurants, for instance, can only operate until 8 p.m. Because of the state of emergency in Tokyo. And they only are allowed to welcome, I think, 50% of capacity. And particularly here in Tokyo, if you go around the neighborhood, you will find establishments, restaurants, shops with a rainbow sticker featured on their entrances. And this is actually a requirement by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government inspects all of these shops. And if they comply with COVID-19 prevention measures, then they will be authorized to display that sticker, which in turn will tell us, the public, where is it safe to shop, where is it safe to eat, where is it safe to do the groceries, etc. So that's one thing that they've done here that I'm not sure if they've done elsewhere.
Tracing apps, is that covered with that? Tracing
yes,
apps?
the Japanese have released a tracing app as of last year, right? Yeah. I believe it's a national tracing app, and that's how they determine whether foot traffic has increased, for instance, in train stations.
With these measures in place, and there's an uptick, let's say, a sudden spike of cases, do you see a stricter enforcement of lockdown measures right now there?
Yes. They eased the restrictions sometime late last year, around November, and they saw a surge around December, January, which was why the federal government decided on a lockdown, or sorry, a state of emergency. They don't use the term lockdown here. A state of emergency for initially 4 prefectures, which was expanded to 7 and then to 10. And a couple of weeks ago, except for the 4 prefectures, Tokyo and the surrounding prefectures, all of the others were taken out of the state of emergency.
Well, let's go to the economy right now. What sectors of the economy are highly affected by the pandemic? For sure, tourism.
Yes. Definitely tourism. The hospitality industry, of course, has been affected. And many small businesses have actually asked for financial assistance from the federal government to tide the pandemic, because during, say, the first state of emergency, a lot of the shops actually had to close, and many of them actually went out of business, the small businesses. So the federal government is looking into ways of how to jumpstart the economy. Manufacturing, etc., the other industries are picking up. Actually, I think there is a very positive outlook for many of the sectors with Japanese economy. It's expected to rebound very soon, especially with the hopefully the COVID cases remaining in the low levels.
You mentioned that this program, the COVID-19 support to individual households, that's what Japan did. Are non-resident Filipinos covered by this stimulus package?
The Japanese government unveiled a one-off 100,000 yen assistance package to the families affected by the pandemic. They are available only to those who are residents of Japan, meaning they have a resident status here in Japan.
So how is the government helping our Filipino friends over there, Filipino community?
Initially, again, we've been doing this for about a year now. In the early part of the pandemic in February, all the way up to around June of last year, the embassy and the consulates general here in Japan were able to repatriate over 1,000 Filipinos who were stranded, who were affected by flight cancellations. And I'm sure you remember, back in February, so more than a year ago, the cruise ship, the Diamond Princess, we also repatriated almost 500 of our seafarers from that cruise ship. And since then, we've been monitoring the situation of our kababayans here in Japan, along with our consulates general in Nagoya and Osaka. And whatever assistance they require, they can contact us. We have a hotline. All of our offices have hotlines. And of course, we assist them to the best of our ability. It's hard to really say what kind of assistance, because there is no one specific assistance that they require. Some of them require documents, some early renewal of passports, for instance. Some of them, especially during the early part of the pandemic last year, required assistance for booking flights or even paying for the flights. But since the commercial flights have returned, that's no longer an issue now. So there are a lot of different types of assistance that they've been requesting, and we try to assist them on this to the best of the ability of the embassy.
We know that the vaccination is also underway around the world, in some parts of the world. How is Japan doing, sir?
Japan has made contracts with the three big pharmaceuticals, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Moderna. And the Pfizer deliveries have been received by the Japanese government early this year. They began vaccinations for the frontline healthcare professionals on February 17.
Yes.
It's ongoing now, and they expanded it to all healthcare workers, including the non-frontline staff. And they are expected to start vaccinating senior citizens and those with pre-existing conditions sometime next month. Moderna and AstraZeneca have also been in the process of securing the emergency use approval from the Japanese government so that they can roll out the vaccinations for that. We heard that AstraZeneca will produce the vaccines domestically here in Japan, so that would ensure the supply for everyone. But I think they ordered enough for everyone here, including the foreigners. So even our Filipinos, kababayans who are residents of Japan, will get the vaccine for free here in Japan.
Non-residents, will they be able to get Any vaccines?
They weren't clear on the non-residents.
Yeah.
If you have a tourist visa, but definitely those who have a resident status in Japan will get the vaccine for free.
All right. So, sir, before we end on a positive note, I'd like to know what do you think Japan has which will make it survive this pandemic?
The Japanese as a people are they bounce back quickly from emergencies. We saw 10 years ago, a couple of days ago, we celebrated the 10th anniversary of the Fukushima disaster, the Great East Japan earthquake. And we saw there the resilience of the Japanese people. They bounced back quickly, despite the fact that I think over 20,000 people perished during that earthquake, and a lot of industries, a lot of households were affected. But in months, they were already able to rebuild and in fact, build back better, as they say in UN lingo. So I think with that kind of resilience, with that kind of attitude, it would be that would hold them in good stead as all of us try to see we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, as it were, and I'm sure that very soon our economies, our people will bounce back from this, and that's the kind of attitude that we should have right now, is to work together, people working together, countries working together to weather this pandemic, and to for all of us to reach that finish line, as it.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Eagle News will be right back. Please don't go away.
Broadcast journalist Wang de la Fuente returns on Philippine television and radio to deliver top stories and engage with the country's policymakers, shapers, and movers. Tatalakayin ang mga pangunahing balita alas 7 ng umaga mula Lunes hanggang Biyernes, live sa teleradyo ng Net25 at Radyo Aguila DCEC 1062. Kasama si Wang de la Fuente sa Balitalakayan.
Nakaabang, sino kaya ang makakalamang upang kunin ang huling pwesto sa March Monthly Finals?
Alam mo, pag hindi mo kasi ine-enjoy at nararamdaman yung awitin na yan, parang bitin, no? Parang sa rock band. Pumasok ka na kaya sa rock band.
This is Tagisan ng Galing Part 2, Singing Edition.
Welcome back to the news. Jalen Green, Jeremy Lin prepare for the next chapter of their basketball careers. Here's Melissa Potes from our Florida Bureau with that report. Melissa.
Jalen Green's G League career came to a close with a season-high 30 points in Team Ignite's loss to Raptors 905 Tuesday. The Filipino-American guard now prepares for the next chapter of his basketball career, the NBA, and shares what he learned in the Orlando bubble.
I think the biggest thing I've learned is have that next shot, next play mentality. In high school, I get down on myself and frustrated, and it wouldn't be a problem. But out here, you gotta have that next play where people gonna eat you alive. How I'm gonna use it to boost? I'm gonna just take everything I learned here on to the next chapter. I've learned a lot. I got a lot of knowledge from the vets, from the coaches, from playing here, from being off the court. So I'm gonna just take everything and just carry it along with me.
Jeremy Lin's road back to the NBA will now be the Guards' focus as the Santa Cruz Warriors' season ended on Tuesday. Lin is humbled to play for an organization with a winning culture.
But the most enjoyable part was just being part of this team. A lot of great guys, a lot of great coaches, a team environment, a team culture, and just a chance to be able to compete and play basketball in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a lot of stuff going on. We almost forget we're in a bubble where there's COVID testing every single day, and there's food and there's access to so many different things. It's a beautiful place, and we get to just go to the gym and come back and compete and come back. The experience was amazing, and I'm just grateful. I'm just as I sit here, I'm just really grateful, just knowing that I don't want to take these things for granted, and I'm not going to be a professional basketball player for my whole life.
The Lakeland Magic closed the G League with a win over the Delaware Blue Coats, adding another championship to Florida sports teams. In Orlando, Florida, Melissa Cotes, Eagle News. We live in interesting times.
In other news, Australia's endangered regent honeyeater bird is losing its song, a sign that it could be nearing extinction, according to scientists, warning in a new research release on Wednesday. Take a look. I wonder what they're singing.
I know, I'm looking it up now. I feel bad. Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. We'll see you again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.